Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time it is a review of the 1990 horror anthology Tales from the Darkside, the movie. Now, Tales from the Darkside, the movie, is a film that I had heard about through Fangoria's book, 101 Most Unheralded Horror Films, and sounded interesting to me because I was familiar with Tales from the Darkside, the show, but I did not know there was a movie. Also, it was a horror anthology, and there were people who were involved with Creepshow who worked on Tales from the Darkside, the movie, or in Romero and Harrison's case, wrote and directed the film, or at least Romero wrote one of the segments, adapted Stephen King's short story Cat from Hell, and John Harrison, who did the score for Creepshow, directed the film. I still remember the first time I saw this. I saw it on CW, or before it was CW, when it was WB, because it was when I was a teenager, and I had that book, and I was still living with my mother and my grandmother, and they had a TiVo, and I remember looking for Tales from the Darkside, the movie, to see if there was any airings of it. And around sometime in October near Halloween, it was actually playing on the CW. And so I recorded it on the TiVo, and then I watched it later, and I distinctly remember how surprised I was by how much the TV version was showing. Like, it showed the complete gargoyle transformation without any cuts. I don't think there was any cuts, period. And this is a firm R movie. I remember seeing the decapitation. I remember seeing all this other stuff. I was really shocked that this was essentially aired uncut on network television. And it wasn't until a few years later that I got my hands on this DVD, Tales from the Darkside, the movie. Because ever since I first saw it on that TV airing, I have enjoyed the film. I will say this, as I've watched it more and more, one particular segment I'm not really that fond of, but the other two segments are still really strong and are still some of the best horror anthology segments that I've personally seen. So it's one of those movies where it's not all across the board excellent, but there's enough that it gets right that, in my opinion, it deserves more recognition. It did okay in the box office, made like $16 million on a $3.5 million budget, but nowadays you don't hear a lot of people talk about it, and it doesn't have that great of a percentage on other review sites, and it doesn't even have a Blu-ray release. I did, however, get a chance to watch it in HD recently because it has a HD version that's available on certain streaming sites. And it is honestly a definitive upgrade over the DVD. It's a definite upgrade over the DVD. The DVD is alright, but it's not the greatest transfer, and the HD version is much better. It has better colors, it has better depth. It's definitely some, and it even has a better audio track, I noticed. It has a more dynamic mix. I would say if you were to give this a watch, or if you haven't seen the film in a while, I would say try to track down the HD version. Either rent it from Amazon or one of your streaming services, or buy it. Hopefully, in the future, Scream Factory, since they have a deal with Paramount, will be coming out with a collector's edition or just a regular edition of this film on Blu-ray, because it deserves it, to be perfectly honest. Like I said, the two segments alone, Lover's Vow and Cat from Hell, are so top-notch that they deserve to be on Blu-ray, even though Lot 249 isn't really that great. And the wraparound segment is take it or leave it. But yeah, like I said, despite the flaws and problems and issues that I personally have with the film, I still think it's a really good film in its own right. But when it comes to a horror anthology, I will say it's above average to me, because I view horror anthologies differently than I do other feature films, because it's multiple short stories, multiple short films in one. So if you have three films essentially in one film, three stories, and one story isn't really that great, I can't really give the film any a rating higher than 3.5 stars. So there's my rating right off the bat. But it's not something that is a It's not nearly as much of a demotion compared to another type of film or another genre of film. An above average horror anthology is still quite good, because that means that there was still a good number of stories that worked. So it's directed by John Harrison, and John Harrison, he did the score for Creepshow, and he also directed some episodes of Tales from the Darkside, the TV show. And John also worked closely with George A. Romero and Laurel Productions. So it makes sense that he was chosen to do this film. And you can see his passion for Tales from the Darkside and for horror anthologies throughout this film and his directing work. I will say this: he's no George A. Romero, but he's still got his own style and his own flair that is still pretty damn impressive, I thought. For a $3.5 million budget, this film looks like it has a bigger budget than that. In large part, I think it has to do with Harrison and how he's able to frame certain shots in ways that are very unique and really get the most out of the atmosphere. I also felt that his work with the cinematographer, Robert Draper, is really impressive. In particular, the sequence Cat from Hell. That segment has so many sequences and so many moments in it that are, in terms of the framing, in terms of how they work with the green screen, and how they do all these other things in terms of the transitions, how the flashback sequences look with this very unique, eerie blue tint. Even has like cat vision at one point where it's a POV of the cat. It's a very ambitious looking segment, and it's something that I've always felt really stands out in a good way visually. So visually, Harrison, I thought, really knocked it out of the park when it comes to his direction for the film. I mean, even in a segment like Lot 249, where there isn't a whole lot for him to work with, it still had a certain visual style and flair to it. And definitely Cat from Hell and Lover's Vow really do have just this really wonderful atmosphere and mood to them. The scripts by Michael McDowell, who adapted Lot 249 and Lover's Vow, which Lover's Vow I think was an original story that he wrote, and Cat from Hell, which is adapted by a Stephen King short story. Which is for the film, it was readapted and taken on by George A. Romero. And that's because initially Cat from Hell was supposed to be in Creepshow 2, but it was cut due to budget constraints, along with the other story, Pinfall. And when you find out stuff like that, you can understand why people like Tom Savini and other Creepshow fans actually like to call this film Creepshow 3. I mean, it definitely deserves it over the real Creepshow 3. And it's not only that. K&B, who worked on Creepshow 2, they did the makeup effects for Tales from the Darkside, the movie. John Harrison, of course, who did the score for Creepshow. He directed this. And Romero, who was involved with Creepshow, he wrote the Cat from Hell segment that's adapted from the Stephen King short story. And there are a few other people who worked on Creepshow who were also who also worked on Tales from the Darkside, the movie. And Tales from the Darkside, the franchise itself, has a connection with Creepshow, because Tales from the Darkside was originally intended to be Creepshow the series. But because of budget, not really budget, it's because of rights issues that Romero was not able to use a Creepshow name. So he decided to start from scratch and came up with the name Tales from the Darkside. So if you take out the Tales from the Darkside branding in this and you replace it with the Creepshow branding, like this could easily be a third Creepshow film. And it would have been right up there with the first two in terms of overall quality. Maybe a little bit below the first two, but not by much. Honestly, could have been the best horror anthology trilogy ever if this actually was released as Creepshow 3. And Laurel Productions, they were involved with Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, as well as this TV show. And Creepshow, the Creepshow, and Creepshow 2. And things are coming even more full circle with Shudder's Creepshow, the series. Which I believe Nicotero was working on that? But yeah, it's one of those things where I think that's fun. I haven't seen it yet. I'm going to see that sometime in the near future when all the episodes are available. But it's nice to see things coming full circle, where Tales from the Dark Side was intended to be Creepshow the series, but things just weren't able to work out. So now we actually have a Creepshow TV series. Now, enough of that particular tangent. Let's actually talk about the segments. So, this film has a wraparound which stars Deborah Harry and Matthew Lawrence. Deborah Harry plays this debutante who is getting ready for a dinner party with her friends, and the main course is going to be this poor kid named Timmy, played by Matthew Lawrence. She caught him while he was doing his brother's paper route and has locked him up in a prison cell that's in her house. And the wraparound is constructed as Timmy is reading from the book Tales from the Dark Side to distract Deborah Harry from eating him or getting him prepared to be eaten. So it's a fun, alright wraparound, but it's nothing particularly amazing, and it's honestly pretty corny. And Matthew Lawrence's acting is very cringy. But, I mean, it could be worse. And it's nice to see Deborah Harry, who also was in an episode of Tales from the Dark Side. There's actually quite a few people who were in Tales from the Dark Side episodes in this. So it makes sense you have some Tales from the Dark Side alums who are a part of the film. So you have William Hickey, who was in an episode. You have Christian Slater, who was in one of his earliest roles in A Case for the Stubborns. So it was nice to see that you had some Tales from the Dark Side cast members who were a part of the film. So the first segment is Lot 249. This is adapted by Michael McDowell, and it's adapted from a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle short story named Lot Number 249. And the two stories couldn't be any different. This is one of those stories where McDowell is tasked with taking this really old story by Conan Doyle and adapting it to the modern times, and it comes across as fairly clunky as a result. I will say this segment has a great cast. You have Steve Buscemi, who plays this disgraced professor at a college named Edward Bellingham, who was cheated by his two classmates, Susan and Lee, who framed him for theft to ruin his chances of winning a scholarship for which they were competing. And you have Christian Slater, who was involved with it all because he is Susan's brother, Andy. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a good cast. I mean, Steve Buscemi, Julianne Moore in her acting debut as Susan. Even an actor named Robert Sedgwick, who might be familiar to you because he's been in a few things. At least for me, he's somewhat familiar because he was in that really awful direct-to-video movie, Nasty Hero. He played the main villain in that. But yeah, you have Robert Sedgwick, and Christian Slater. So Lot 249 is this mummy that Bellingham acquired, which has a scroll inside of it that enables him to control the dead. So if he reads the inscription on the scroll, he can control the mummy and have it do his bidding. And it's not only mummies, he can also use any reanimated corpse, essentially. As long as it's dead flesh, he can reanimate it and get it to do whatever he wants with the scroll. So because he got cheated out of his scholarship, he decides to get revenge. So he uses the mummy to get his revenge. And the effects by K&B are good. I mean, I will say this, the effects by K&B of the mummy are quite good. I don't think that was a problem at all. I do feel that this segment, though, really, it kind of craps out with the gore. And what do I mean by that? It's one of those that it half-asses it. And I don't know if that was intentional or if it was something where the censors got a hold of it and were like, whoa, 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 this is already violent enough. We can't have mummies pulling brains out of people's noses. No. So it just comes across as a segment that has gore that doesn't go all the way, and that's not very satisfying. So the mummy encounters Brad. Well, actually, his character's named Lee in this. But he gets Lee and takes a bent up piece of wire and sticks it in his nose, and blood pours on the floor, but you don't see anything. You don't see any brains getting pulled out. You just see some brains that are put in a fruit bowl later, which is, they're talking about, oh, mummies, and they pull their brains out their noses, and then you don't see it. I mean, in this kind of movie, that's kind of what you're in for. That's kind of what you're looking for. But that's not what happens. Susan, she's next on the hit list for Bellingham's revenge. So he has the mummy show up and break into her abode and then cut her and stab her in the back with some scissors. And then the mummy stuffs some flowers in her back, because I guess that's something to do with some mummy thing. Some mummy tradition, I don't know, Egyptian deal. And tapes her up, and then there's a little bit of blood, but it's really not much. And then Christian Slater, of course, now he's pissed because his sister is dead. He pieces things together and finds out that Bellingham is the one behind all of this, and he's using the mummy and the scroll to do his dirty work. So he decides he's going to take out Bellingham. So he ties him up and doesn't necessarily torture him. He kind of does, because he sprays him with lighter fluid and he threatens to burn him or kill him. But the mummy shows up, and because Bellingham says the words to get it to come alive. But Christian Slater, his character Andy's prepared, and he's got an electric saw and cuts the mummy up, and there's some pretty good effects there as well. And he burns what he thinks is the scroll, but because he's a dumbass and can't really tell the difference between some Alexandrian pictogram porn and some 8th dynasty Egyptian scroll, Bellingham gets away and uses the scroll to bring Lee and Susan back to life, and has them go pay Andy a visit and give Andy Bellingham's regards. And yeah, it's insinuated that Andy's gonna be killed by his sister and her boyfriend, reanimated by Bellingham's Egyptian scroll. But you don't see it, so that's another letdown. I don't know if that was a stylistic choice or was just one of those things where they just didn't decided not to go there, or maybe they had more to it but it was cut out because of censors. I don't really know the whole story behind it. All I know though is that this is a pretty tame and honestly pretty forgettable segment. And mummies don't do a whole lot for me anyway, so that's another thing. That's part of it. That's a big part of it. Like, mummies are like, I like The Mummy, the 1999 film, and there are a few other mummy stuff that I don't mind. I like the Tales from the Crypt episode, Creep Course. and the mummy stuff and waxwork, but it's just one of those things that's just it's at best it's average, and at worst it's below that. I will say this though, there is one part of this segment that I really love, and it's the song That's the Way of All Flesh by Jim Manzi. I love that song. It's a great old school piece of AOR music, and if you like AOR music, I highly recommend it. Jim Manzi, though, he did the score for this, and it's honestly a really lame score. Just like the segment itself. It's too bad because it's a waste of a really solid cast, and it's overall it's a concept and it's a story that doesn't quite unravel at the seams, but it definitely comes close. The next segment, though, is an absolute blast. It is such a wild hair of a episode. And what I mean by wild hair is it is one of those episodes that just really sticks in the back of your throat. And if you've seen this segment, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, this is the one that's adapted by Stephen King's short story, the same name, The Cat from Hell. And this features a wealthy, wheelchair-bound old man named Drogon, who's played by William Hickey, who was so good at playing these type of characters, these unscrupulous, decrepit bastards. So he's made his fortune off the backs of cats because he used them to test his pharmaceutical products, and specifically the most successful product that has made him his entire fortune. And he's made it off the backs of these poor cats. In fact, by his count, he's about 5,000 cats have died at the hands of Drogon Pharmaceuticals. Knowing this, he knows that more than likely he's gonna get some kind of karmatic justice in return. So that's exactly what happens. Feline kind, all of I don't feline kind isn't really the right word to put right word to use, but cats themselves, like the breed of cats decide to send one of their own to get revenge. And it's this harbinger of death and doom in the form of a black cat. Of course, a black cat, black cats, superstitious, whole 9 yards. Now, this cat, though, definitely lives up to the name Cat from Hell, and then some. So, Drogon, because his entire family and friends, which really wasn't much, it was just his sister, her friend, and his butler, have all been taken out by this cat. So he decides to hire a hitman named Halston, played by David Johansen. And David Johansen you might recognize because he's a musician. He did some work with the band New York Dolls, and he's also was Buster Poindexter in that one-hit wonder track Hot Hot Hot. And out of all of the musicians turned actors that I've seen, David Johansen is definitely one of the best. His performance in this is a blast to watch, and he nails it. And I thought it was a really good performance, and you could definitely tell that he was having a lot of fun with it. And I honestly would have liked to have seen him do more, to be perfectly honest. It's too bad. It seems like he didn't really get a whole lot to do. Really didn't get a lot of opportunities. And that's honestly too bad because, like I said, out of a lot of the musicians turned actors that I've seen, he's definitely one of the best out there. So before Johansen's character Halston is left alone to take care of the cat and earn his $100,000, Drogon tells him the history with this cat and why he wants it dead. And he does it in a series of flashbacks that are like I said earlier in the film, that are really impressive visually. The blue tint is something that I thought was really unique and really well done. It's not really the best way to describe it, but that's kind of what it looks like. The lighting in here kind of doesn't really do it justice, though. Um, there's the cat. There's the cat from hell. Um, so he tells the lurid stories of what happened to his loved ones, where his sister Amanda, she was tripped by the cat down a flight of stairs to her death. Her best friend, Carolyn, she was next to go, even though Drogon warned her, but she locked the cat up with her in her room, and the cat goes up to her late one night, puts a paw over her mouth, and sits on her face and suffocates her to death. I will say that that sequence is hilarious for all the wrong reasons, because it's a really bad and cheap looking effect by K&B. For the most part, their effects in this are really top notch, and in the case of the Lover's Vow segment, legitimately Oscar worthy for best makeup effects. But that moment where the cat is sitting on her face, it is comedy gold, because it is clearly a fake cat, and it is so obvious that's the case. Um, so the cat sits on her face and suffocates her to death. And then the next victim is the butler, who takes the cat in a basket because Drogon has set it up with a vet. They're going to take the cat sometime after midnight and have it put down for good, but the cat's too smart for that, so it breaks out of the basket, slashes the butler in the face, jumps up on the dashboard and hisses at him and scares him, and then the car crashes and the cat walks away unscathed. Because you'll find out that this cat, you can't kill it. It just will not die. Um, like I said, it's a harbinger of death and doom, and it will not stop until it has exacted the revenge of uh, its species. So anyway, Drogon tells Halston all of this, and then he fucks off somewhere to goes out of town and leaves Halston with everything that you could ever want. Of course, that's a bunch of bullshit. Just cheap booze and barely nothing in the fridge is apparently everything that you could ever want or need. And so Halston starts his hit on this cat. This cat's one step ahead of him, smart, just outwits him at every turn. He tries to kill it in various different ways. When he first met the cat, he tried to strangle it, and it scratched him in the hand. Then he tries to stab it, and the cat's too smart for that, and scratches him in the shoulder. Then he tries to inject it with some drugs, and then the cat's like, fuck you, I'm gonna tear up your balls. And it's a really wince-inducing scene, because the cat just leaps up and claws his crotch and leaves a giant hole in his pants, and there's blood, and you're just like, oh my god. Just imagining that, just imagining a cat just being rabid with those claws and those teeth and just tearing up your junk is horrifying. And after that, he's like, fuck this cat. I'm gonna kill this cat. He's like, I've never missed a hit. You're not gonna be the first, you pussy. And so he sets up the cat. It's actually a really clever way to get it right where he wants it. He has this rifle with a laser sight, and he's like, I've got you now, and sets up some food so the cat will go, when the cat goes up to get the food, he'll put a bead on it with a laser and then shoot it. And he gets the laser right on it and fires a bullet, and it misses the cat completely and blows up the TV set behind the cat. And of course, at this point, Halston is incredulous. He's like, it's impossible. I never miss. I had a dead bead on him. And then the cat takes him out in the most crazy, batshit insane way possible. Like, it's so crazy. I'm just thinking about it, and I'm having a hard time speaking or communicating with you because it's spoilers. If you haven't seen this, I'm just going to say spoilers here because this is one of those things where you have to see it to believe it. So, Halston, he's got the gun. He's just wildly shooting around the place. The cat's jumping around, slashing him in the face. And then the cat leaps up on his face. And then it stuffs itself in his mouth and down his throat and into his stomach. That's how the cat kills this hitman. It leaps into his mouth, goes down his throat and into his stomach, and it's all done practically. And it's a really gruesome looking effect. And it's quite well done, considering the low budget of $3.5 million. And so now, Halston is history. Drogon comes back from his trip. He sees Halston dead on the floor with his gun next to him. And he's like, oh no, this can't be. And he rolls his wheelchair up to Halston to take a look at him. The cat then essentially regurgitates itself out of Halston's dead body, right up the mouth, leaps onto Drogon's lap, yowls at him. Drogon has a heart attack, as most people would in that particular instance. And then the segment ends with the cat just cleaning itself like, yep, job well done. All right. Just like... It's fucking insane. And I love it. It's so good. It's so great. It's such a great segment. So... Yeah, that's Cat from Hell. The last segment is Lover's Vow. And Lover's Vow is honestly one of the most tragic and deeply unsettling, not necessarily unsettling isn't really the right word, but one of the most tragic segments that I've seen in a horror anthology. This one really has a very strong emotional impact. So this one is written by Michael McDowell, and it's inspired by the Yuki Onna, which is a spirit in Japanese folklore that is well known for being in Kawadan, stories and studies of strange things. So this one, instead of it being a ghost like in that, it is a different type of entity or creature. So, this one features a character named Preston, who's played by James Remar, in a role that you really don't see him do very often. This down on his luck, average Joe artist. Normally, James Remar is typecast as like a thug or a tough guy or a bad guy. And it was nice to see, it was a nice change of pace to see him play this kind of role, and I thought he pulled it off really well. I honestly think it's one of his best performances, one of my favorite roles, period, for James Remar. So he's one step away from being out on his ass. His art isn't selling. He's lost his agent. He's drinking his sorrows away at a local bar. The bartender takes him, decides to give him a little bit of a hand back to his loft, to his apartment. The bartender sees something rustling around in the alley, and screams his head off, gets his hand cut off, and then he gets decapitated, and then you're like, holy shit, the fuck was that? And it turns out what he saw was a gargoyle. This giant gargoyle with these giant wings, and these sharp teeth, and it's a really great looking makeup effect. K&B really outdid themselves here. It's all done practically, and this gargoyle is in the flesh and in living color, and it's a really impressive makeup effect. And the gargoyle then turns its sights to Preston, and Preston is understandably terrified, and he's like, "Don't kill me!" And then the gargoyle, it actually speaks, and it tells him, "I won't kill you. In exchange for your life, you have to make a promise. Promise that you never saw me. Promise that you never heard me talk, and you never tell anyone about what happened. And cross your heart." And then slashes him on the chest. Spares his life. Now, that sounds like, okay, sounds kind of silly, right? And it is. It is kind of silly, I have to admit. Like, when the gargoyle is talking, it's hard to take it seriously. That's the one aspect out of this story that doesn't really work, because the dialogue the gargoyle has is talking like a normal human, and it's just, it's quite silly, to be honest. The juxtaposition of a gargoyle, monstrous gargoyle, and it's all like, "You have to make a promise, cross your heart." But anyway, spares him. That same night, he meets this woman named Carola, who's played by Chong, and they end up falling for one another. They become infatuated with one another. They fall in love. She has contacts high up in the art community that she provides Preston with, and his career takes off. They get engaged, and then the story flashes forward 10 years later, on the anniversary of the day they met. They have 2 kids. They have a boy and a girl, and Remar is rehired as agent back. He's played by Robert Klein, who is nice to see him. I really like Robert Klein. I think he's a really underrated actor. At least, you know, when it comes to a lot of stuff nowadays, because nobody really talks about him. Like, back in his prime, a lot of people were talking about him. Critics were justifiably giving him his due, but you rarely hear anybody talk about Robert Klein anymore. So he rehires his agent, and his life has been amazing. It's been 10 years of the best life that anybody could possibly hope for or ask for, and this dumbass decides he's going to break the promise. And every time I've seen this segment, I always had the same reaction, where I'm like, "Don't do it, man. Everything's so good. Like, why? Why would you tell her that? Why would you do that?" Like, I would never do it. If a fucking gargoyle showed up, decapitated one of my friends, and cut his hand off, and then talked to me and said, "Oh, I'll let you live as long as you make a promise," I'm like, hell yeah, I'm going to make this promise and I'll never break it. Why would I? So, but this dipshit dumbass does it. So he breaks the promise, and the twist is, spoiler, Carola is a gargoyle. So he tells her what happened the night they met, because she's like, "There's nothing you can give me that I don't already have." And he's like, "Yes, there is. The truth about what happened the night we met." And he tells her everything, even shows her this sculpture of the gargoyle that he's been keeping secret from everyone. And Carol is like, "You promised you'd never tell." And then she turns back into the gargoyle, and it is a shocking, stunning display of practical effects brilliance by K&B. It is so good. Gargoyle hands rip through her arms, wings rip through her body, like flesh is torn asunder. It's one of the best transformation sequences that I've seen, to be honest. It's right up there with stuff in the Fly remake and the Blob. Wait, the Blob doesn't really have transformation sequence. I meant to say the Fly 2. So there's a lot of, yeah, it's a great transformation. Or American Werewolf in London, yeah, it is right up there with that. It's a great transformation sequence. It's easily in the top 5. And then, if that isn't bad enough, the kids also turn into gargoyles. The kids change too, and you're like, "Oh man, that's such a bummer." Like, it's bad enough. Like, this beautiful, sexy Carola turns into this monstrous gargoyle, and then the kids turn into these ugly gargoyle kids, and then, of course, since he broke the promise, it's time for Preston to die. And I will say this, the way that this is handled, and there was really no way to get around it, but this cracks me up every time. and this is not supposed to be funny, but I can't help it. Like, I always laugh my ass off at this particular exchange, and the reason why is because the way that the voiceover is for the gargoyle, and the way that the line delivery is, and the lines that the gargoyle is given are just silly and laughable. Preston, he says, "I love you." "I love you too, but you broke your vow. And now you sealed our fate." And then the gargoyle just bites him in the neck. And you're like, what? "I love you too." Oh man, shit. It just cracks me up every time. And I don't think that's not the intention. It's supposed to be sad and oh my god, it's so bad. But it's the juxtaposition of a scary gargoyle and "I love you too" is just something that it just doesn't work. It's memorable for all the wrong reasons. So Preston dies because he's a dumbass, throws away everything, and the gargoyle with her kids in tow smashes through the skylight, flies up to the roof of the apartment complex, lands, and then turns to stone. And I mean, that too, just thinking about that. Like, the kids, like, they turn into gargoyles and then they turn to stone. Like, their life is over. You think about Carol or the gargoyle, like, she had, a chance at being normal, and that was all tossed away, and now that's over. It's an episode. It's a segment that's always stuck with me ever since I saw it, because the great practical makeup effects by K&B, but also just the tragicness of it all, like just the darkness of this story, and just like this is such a ultra bummer, but it works. It doesn't come across as forced. It works. Definitely hammers home the point that you should always keep your promises. And then the film ends with a wraparound. The wraparound ends with Matthew Lawrence's character Timmy getting one over Deborah Harry, tricks her, causes her to slip and fall, and she ends up in the oven. And so she's going to be dinner. And then he escapes. And he's like, "Don't you just love happy endings?" And then the movie ends. You have the end credits. You have a nice remix of the Tales from the Darkside theme at one point in the end credits, as well as in the opening credits. And yeah, that's Tales from the Darkside, the movie. Any other things I want to mention? I would probably say, like I said earlier, cinematography is quite impressive by Robert Draper. The editing by Harry B. Miller it's serviceable. It's nothing spectacular, but it's good. And it goes by at a good pace. It's only 93 minutes, so it goes by. It's at a good pace. It's never boring. Despite the fact that the first segment is pretty weak, I definitely don't think it's as bad as some of the critics make it out to be, or as bad as its percentage is on certain review sites. And originally there was going to be a sequel. Apparently there was plans by Laurel Productions to do a sequel for the film in October of 1990. There was even a script that was written by Michael McDowell, Georgia Romero, and Gahan Wilson, who was a newcomer. Segments planned included an adaptation of Robert Bloch's Almost Human, alongside adaptations of Stephen King's short stories Pinfall and Rainy Season. So Pinfall would have finally been adapted in Tales from the Darkside, the movie, too. But it never came to fruition, which is really too bad. I really would have liked to have seen that. And it's not like this bombed, so it's one of those things that's kind of curious. But I think it's probably because Tales from the Darkside, the IP, was no longer really as popular. So I think that's a big reason why it didn't happen. Because it probably viewed the Tales from the Darkside IP as something that wouldn't be that profitable anymore. By the time this film came out, Tales from the Darkside was almost off air anyway. So yeah. But anyway, just reiterate my rating: 3.5 out of 5 stars, above average. Like I said, for an anthology, that's a good note. That's a good review. That means it's better than most. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Tales from the Dark Side, the movie. I hope you enjoyed the review, and I know it was a long one, but hey, I liked the film. I wanted to give it a in-depth review. I thought it personally deserved it. But anyway, thank you for watching, and as always, I will see you later. See ya.